All right,
Yep.
we are recording. Okay, let me go back to full view. All right, thank you for that. So it's in your hands, Deborah, for whenever you would like to start.
I think you will just let a few more people come in before we start.
Okay.
I won't let it get too far after 6 though.
All right.
Welcome to everyone who has joined us. Thank you.
And so it's true that you can see me?
We see your box with your name.
Oh, okay, so the video's gone because this is up. Interesting. Okay. Well, I'm going to be incognito for the first half hour then.
All right.
And thank you all for being panelists tonight. Really appreciate that.
All right. Well, I want to respect everyone's time, so I'll give it only one more minute and then we'll go ahead and start.
Okay, sounds good.
And then before we begin, just a friendly reminder to everyone who's participating, if you could leave yourself on mute while the presenters are speaking, that always gives us a better audio recording. And then after the speakers have finished their presentations, we'll be able to take questions through the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. All right. Well, I think with that, we can begin our program tonight. Welcome and thank you for joining us to learn more about the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin's plan to request a change in the National League's bylaws to eliminate structural age bias. I am Deborah Cronmiller. I serve as the Executive Director for the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. Tonight we will be learning about the Wisconsin-led plan to change the national bylaws. We'll provide some background on how we got to this point, what other leagues around the country are doing to be more inclusive, and why young voting members will add value and impact to our organization. Joining us this evening are 4 panelists. First, our very own Ellen Penwell, the Membership and Events Manager of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. Ellen provides management support to local leagues throughout the state, serves as the state league liaison with new leagues, heads up the membership and leadership development program, helps to create Wisconsin's DEI action plan, and coordinates the league's statewide events. Ellen is a member of LWV Whitewater area and has served as its president for 8 years. Also joining us this evening is Miriam Simmons, a current member and secretary of the board for the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. Miriam is a professional registered parliamentarian and advises leagues on parliamentary matters. Miriam was part of the LWV Bloomington, Minnesota League when they spearheaded the 2016 recommendations to change the national bylaws to remove voting member restrictions, including citizenship and age requirements. Joining us this evening is Layla Ahmed, a freshman at Madison West High School who is actively involved in political engagement, including collaborating with the League of Women Voters of Dane County, the High School Democrats of America, and volunteering for candidates in local elections. And finally tonight, we will hear from Evan Tess Murray, the Education and Engagement Projects Manager for LWV Maine, and a volunteer with Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. Evan is a Mainer, and with a degree in sociology from USM, Evan advises the LWV Maine's New Youth Council, which is a growing group of young students who take charge of getting out the vote in their schools and communities. Next slide. Tonight, we're going to learn more about the Board of Wisconsin's board's action to make the recommendation to members for considering and voting at the June 12th annual meeting. The board is recommending that the LWV Wisconsin propose an amendment to the LWV US bylaws at the 2022 convention to strike the language at age 16 years of age from the definition of voting members. And to learn more about why the board is making this recommendation and why your vote at the annual meeting will be so important, I will turn it over to Ellen Penwell.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And what I'd like to provide for those of you attending our program tonight is some context for how this action recommendation came to be in front of you at annual meeting. In late 2020, the Community Alliances Committee, which we refer to as the CAC, formed a work group to explore age barriers to full membership and participation in League, and then submit what we learned back to the CAC, including any actions we'd recommend to lower or eliminate identified barriers. I was a part of that workshop, as was Layla, who joins us on the panel tonight. A few words about the CAC. I should keep it here for a second. It's a committee of the state board. It formed several years ago to pilot strategies and expand League outreach to diverse communities and increase and strengthen diversity in all ways that are stated in the DEI policy. It has grown from a few members representing 3 local leagues in 2017 into a really amazing learning community of many members representing 11 of our local leagues. As our work group got underway, it didn't actually take us very long to identify what we perceive to be as structural bias, age bias in the national bylaws. Article 3, Section 2A, voting members. Persons at least 16 years of age who join the league shall be voting members of local leagues, state leagues, and the National League. Okay, so we took that restrictive language, we compared it and contrasted it, this very specific membership criterion, with the national and our state DEI policy. They are both the same. Both clearly state that we are an organization fully committed to diversity, equity, inclusion in principle and in practice. Practice defined as actual application of an idea or value, as opposed to only maintaining theories about it. And the bylaws continue that, or the policy continues that there shall be no barriers to full participation in the league. And that's inclusive of membership voting rights on the basis of, and I have here highlighted some of the most relevant terms: age, generation, education level, and thinking style. You might remember also that at the 2020 National Convention, DEI was further elevated to a core institutional value on par with the League's nonpartisanship policy by the approval of new language in the bylaws, the policy itself, of course, and the language of intent that reads, quote, "The League is fully committed to ensure compliance in principle and in practice to the DEI policy." Improving equity in League involves increasing justice and fairness within the League's written rules of conduct. These are our bylaws, so everyone is given equal opportunity. Our work group agreed it's time we remove structural age bias in our bylaws and align membership criteria with our core values by removing this restrictive language. This was the action that the CAC recommended to the board, and they approved it unanimously in April of this year. And it leads us thus to a membership vote on this issue at our annual meeting next month. And I'll turn it over now to Miriam.
Thank you. Thanks, and hello, everybody. So I was a helper person and running around on the convention floor in 2016 when League of Women Voters Minnesota introduced with the support of many of our local leagues and many state leagues, introduced or put forth the amendment to delete citizens and insert persons. So that's where we're at today. And it was actually two amendments. So we've first dealt with the citizens issue and then to delete at least 18 years of age. And that was, our goal was to just eliminate the age requirement. So we just didn't have to think about a lower limit in terms of the age. There was a massive amount of pushback on eliminating having no age restriction. Okay, so what you're going to be, and I suspect you're still going to be faced with some pushback on this. And so I would urge you to consider, as a practical matter, I like to use that phrase, as a practical matter, you're not going to have 6-year-olds interested in public policy. But I really truly don't know what the lower limit is. I don't know if it's 12 years old. I can think of 12-year-olds I know who would be smart enough and engaged enough to do voter registration. So anyway, I wanted to convey to you that at the time we used an argument as to diversity and inclusion as to removing that age requirement. And they just didn't buy it. So after much messing around on the floor, anyway, we at least got an amendment in to drop it from at least 18 to at least 16. So that's where we stand today. Now, and then my note here is to just note that there was no national DEI policy at the time. That's been subsequent to 2016. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Miriam.
Mhm.
I'm sure Wisconsin will benefit from all that Minnesota learned back in 2016 as we walk through this process. Now it's my pleasure to turn over the program to Layla Ahmed. Layla drafted the rationale statement provided to each of you upon registration for this meeting. And Layla will share with us why she concluded the age restriction for LWV US membership is not only outdated, but ageist and counterproductive, a violation of our promise to establish an inclusive environment that ensures equitable access to resources and opportunities. Layla?
Yeah, hi everyone. So, as Deborah mentioned, I did draft the rationale statement, and here on the slide, you'll actually see a few of the remarkable people who inspired me to write a lot of the things that I did. As I'm sure we all know, Malala Yousafzai, who's on the far left, who actually at age 11 began campaigning for education for female youth worldwide, that she continues to do today as a 23-year-old. Greta Thunberg, who at age 16 began advocating for environmental rights and kickstarted worldwide protests in favor of combating climate change every single year. Marley Diaz, who at age 11 started a movement to expand the amount of Black girl representation in literature, which she continues to advocate for today at age 16. And finally, Blair Imani, a Black queer Muslim historian, activist, and author who has been writing and publishing works since she was 15. I think these women are all incredible examples of the unfairness of age bias, especially in our League of Women Voters policy, and that along with some of the points I've highlighted here on the slide. That first of all, youth are already politically engaged and politically engaged in a very unique manner, which I will talk about a little bit later. Two, how excluding youth from full participation is discriminatory. Three, how the League really does need their voice at the table in equal partnership with youth. And four, how engaging with youth is actually one of the best ways to keep with our League's mission to empower voters. I think we can move to the next slide. So first of all, youth are already politically engaged. It has been my experience and the experience of many of my peers that those older than us hold this misconception that we as youth are too uninformed, unaware, or immature to care about politics. But we're not. Youth actually are already overwhelmingly politically engaged, and politically engaged in a very unique manner because we take advantage of the digital age in which we are growing up. Given everything that we're seeing online, from social media to news media, it's for all intents and purposes impossible for a teen on TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram to be unaware of current events, contrary to popular belief. I know it's often assumed that teens on social media kind of live in their own bubble, but if you actually opened up a kid's Instagram and scrolled through the accounts of their friends, I can almost guarantee that you would find post after post about what's happening in Israel and Palestine right now. Post after post about voting rights, post after post about climate change, post after post about organizations to donate to and petitions to sign and letters to write to your representatives and ways for us to contribute to causes that we're passionate about however we can. And I think that that effort by us is so commendable because youth access to political involvement is already so limited precisely because of bylaws like our 16-year age minimum. We aren't given spaces to discuss our political views, to grow and to have discourse. So we use whatever outlets we have to raise our voices and spread awareness.
Pardon me?
Yeah. And further than that, it's also important to understand that youth, beyond just being politically engaged already, actually are creating their own spaces to create political change. Youth worldwide are already working to tackle the current political and socioeconomic burdens that we face, as exemplified by organizations like the PFA Institute, the Malala Fund, the March for Our Lives movement, the United We Dream movement, and so many others. We do have a voice that we are very eager to share. And if adults aren't going to give us the opportunity to do so, then we will create spaces for ourselves. That's how motivated we are. That's how determined we are. Furthermore, we have a unique perspective that most adults really don't value as much as they should. A way that I like to think about it is that mathematically, the ratio of political crises I've lived through to number of years I have been alive is probably unhealthy. But it's that ratio exactly that motivates me to try to do something about it. That's what motivates me to volunteer. That's what motivates me to canvass and to join organizations like the League of Women Voters and to try and make change within these organizations. In addition to working on this policy, I'm actually partnering with the League and UW-Madison's youth program
Being recorded.
organize a couple voting drives this summer. So it's that passion and that drive and that real sense of urgency among youth to fix the world that we are about to inherit that is so valuable to organizations and that is so overlooked already. And all of this doesn't make me some kind of exception to the rule, because this sentiment is shared amongst every single young person I know, and that is not an exaggeration. And on the next slide, we can see just how excluding youth is not only overlooking a major source of untapped potential, but downright detrimental and discriminatory, especially given our diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. Because preventing youth from participating underestimates our value and simultaneously promotes this myopically discriminatory culture in which we're not allowed the opportunity to participate in civic or democratic life or to build the knowledge, skills, and understanding necessary to do so. Research has shown that communities where young people vote, volunteer, and belong to associations are actually more prosperous and resilient places than those where youth are excluded. Furthermore, engaging with youth early on helps to promote lifelong voting habits among us and our peers. And you'd think that given our mission is to empower voters and defend democracy, that reaching those voters at a young age and supporting them through their journeys to empowerment so that they can continue to defend our democracy would be a no-brainer. But apparently not, given this 16-year age minimum. And this all isn't even to mention the fact that the League already has programs in place that are designed to work with youth and rely on those youth for their success, especially in high schools. So if those youth have demonstrated their interest in the work that we do and passionately contribute to our organization, why would we consider them anything less than equal partners and members in the League of Women Voters? And on the next slide, we have just a few examples of working with Wisconsin youth in the League. You can move to the next slide now.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're doing. Thank you, Layla.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we wanted to show any of these videos, but I think one would be really valuable to look at is the Urban League Vote For Me video series, where a bunch of youth express their voices on voter engagement, even though they're not old enough to vote yet.
Okay. Well, thank you, Layla, for a very powerful testimony. And I think that what we'd like to do now is look at those existing partnerships that the League in Wisconsin does have with youth. Eliminating age bias in League will allow us to move forward, building communities of civically engaged youth, which in fact we're already doing, but the difference going forward by eliminating age bias is that we'll be working with youth in equal partnership, as Layla mentioned. That's a very powerful new positioning to have. Now, Wisconsin Leagues, as Layla mentioned, we have a history of working with youth. 17 of our local leagues currently run high school voter registration programs. Those programs depend on youth participation. We rely on youth in those programs for peer-to-peer messaging, which is so powerful on voter registration and the voting process. The Milwaukee County League's High School Voter Education and Registration Project is a leading example of how this works in our state. In partnership with Milwaukee City Schools and the City of Milwaukee Election Commission, League volunteers provide in-person outreach to 41 MPS high schools, working with students and staff to register students that are eligible before they leave high school. And throughout the school year, they provide training materials and support, including a special program that trains students to become high school voter registration advocates. Let's look at some other more unique programming that's happened. The League of Women Voters of Appleton has been engaged in a partnership with an Appleton High School marketing program for several years now. And in 2020, 2 Appleton students co-founded a Voice Your Vote social media marketing campaign, which aimed to educate voters, but more importantly, their peers, on the importance and security of the voting process in Wisconsin. So in these interviews that you can access on the Appleton YouTube site, they interviewed their city clerk, their chief election inspector, and the mayor, all of whom played key roles overseeing local aspects of the 2020 election for president. Their interviews then became the Voice Your Vote, the Integrity Project video series, and that's what all of these are examples of. And it was so impressive. These students were honored with Appleton's 2020 Youth Making Democracy Work, the Youth Making Democracy a Work Award. So this tells me the League is certainly a natural fit for all of these youth-led initiatives. I am going to go down. I'm going to close that out. Get back to full screen here. Okay, so it's like we are positioned to mentor youth in leadership and advocacy education, but as partners, we will also then follow and support their lead on issues they feel passionate about. And these are powerful groups of youth. Another example is the Let's Vote initiative. And it was started by 2 high school students in Oshkosh who created a nonpartisan youth voter program with a mission to empower students to become educated voters. by supplying them with online classroom resources. And this is such a well thought out and developed program, and it's geared toward K through 12. At the elementary level, their messaging is to teach, like, what is an election? Who is your mayor? Very, very appropriate and designed for elementary kids. At the middle school level, they move to discussing the importance of voting. What is voter suppression? And how do you call your representatives? And by the time a kid is in high school, the messaging becomes focused on voter registration, the process, and how they can involve themselves in working at the polls as high school students. But what is truly, truly, I think, just blew me away in particular was an aspect of a larger goal that these two young students developed and have now advocated, and that is to get legislation passed here in Wisconsin that requires all state schools to teach 1 hour of voting education to K through 12 students each year. Now, that is applaudable advocacy, and that is being like any league action that we might otherwise take. For the Vote For Me video series that Layla mentioned, I actually, I didn't have a video to actually go to the show. They are very powerful, and I encourage you to watch them. But the State League did partner with the Urban League in creating this video series, which engaged young people explaining why voting is important to them, even when they're not old enough to vote. So the campaign focused, as Layla mentioned, on the power of young people to influence adults in their lives, and asking them then to tag 3 adults to vote for them because of the issues they deeply care about that affect their future. And then one last example is a youth art project, Get Out the Vote postcards. This was a collaboration with middle school and high school art classes. Our office worked on this with an out-of-state teacher who asked her students to design Get Out the Vote postcards. So they did that, and you can see how creative they are. They were sent to us, and we in turn sent them to Wisconsin voters, encouraging them to participate in the 2020 election. So these are just a few examples of what youth have done here in Wisconsin, what they're currently doing, what they initiated on their own or in partnership with the league already. And it suggests to me that the potential for future youth-led voter education engagement projects in full partnership with the league is just unlimited. Meaningful youth engagement views youth as equal partners with adults in the decision-making process. Programs and activities are developed with them rather than for them. And in this kind of equal partnership, both adults and young people are fully engaged, open to change, and share a unified vision. And I believe the time has come to make this happen. So we're now going to take a deeper look at other models for youth engagement and how we might be able to learn from the experience that Evan Tess-Murray has received in Maine, in the state of Maine. So Evan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everybody, for inviting me here tonight. As we mentioned at the top, I am the state of Maine's Education and Engagement Projects Manager, so I'm staff. And that oversees all of the different kinds of voter education and engagement we do, but it did include high school outreach and voter registration drives, exactly the same kind you were talking about. And then COVID happened, and we couldn't go into high schools. So I pulled together a team of volunteers, including a couple of really amazing people who were looking for a new project, and said, can you just brainstorm some ideas about how we can meaningfully connect with young people if we can't go to their schools? Like, what do we do? We tried a million things. Some of them worked, and it was a pretty cool experience because a lot of it was like extremely organic. We did we don't have online voter registration in Maine, so we did a thing where we partnered with schools to mail registration materials and information to all the students of the correct age. Things like that, that were just kind of interesting, weird ways to attempt to get into people's lives who were at that point doing school at home and not really knowing what the future was going to hold. Part of that is that we were hearing so much from young people who were really concerned about getting out the vote, about engagement, about wanting to be involved, that we put together a youth council in advance of the election. 50 students joined. They did various kinds of mostly social media actions and relational organizing training. So we have a couple of trainings we do on how to map your friend list and figure out who the most effective people for you to be using energy talking to are. And got a lot of those young folks working to engage not only their peers, but also their parents, and working on turnout. And the youth vote was incredibly strong in Maine and many other states. So we're not unusual here, but I got to work with a lot of the young folks who were involved in exactly that, which was very cool. As we started doing that work, what we were just saying about the model for this work, which I feel very strongly about, and thankfully, like the folks I work with do as well, that it needs to be meaningful. Youth need to be full partners. We're not coming into this asking them to do work without giving them a benefit. We're not coming into this seeing it as transactional. We are genuinely inviting people into the work and working from an empowerment model where the idea is really to help folks use their own power, figure out what makes democracy relevant to their lives, figure out what it is that they need, find out how we can support them. And I mentioned the growing voters thing. We just held our convention and had Dr. Kei Kawashima Ginsburg, who is the director of Circle, the Research Institute, come and give a talk on that, hosted by our youth council, actually. So the idea of growing voters is that we need to stop talking about mobilizing young people and start talking about encouraging, supporting them so that they can become engaged citizens naturally, essentially. So a youth-led structure emerged. It was very much something that was like, we have this batch of people who are interested across the state. What do they want to be after the election? And we ended up with a council, a youth council of, it's fairly a large list, but a relatively small group of people who are currently very actively involved. But it's led by a steering committee of between 5 and 8, currently 7 young people elected by the youth council. The steering committee, they define their own rules, they figure out their own governance structures, which were some very fun conversations to have, extremely league conversations to have. These young folks fit in really well as they sit there and try to figure out, do we make decisions by consensus and how, and who's going to facilitate these meetings? And a part of that moving forward is that we wanted to talk about what it would mean to genuinely invite them to participate. And what it meant, what they wanted, what we pushed for, what our board agreed to, and what our membership ultimately just voted in was to add a youth council seat to our board. So we will have a representative of our youth council on the board, and our membership just made our youth council permanent, which I'm really happy about. That happened 2 weeks ago. It's brand new. Our young folks were really excited about it. So this is sort of the model that we're talking about. It was very much emergent. It is very much rooted in the idea that we can support and guide young folks, and they can in turn support and guide us. In it, that it strengthens all of us. And on our next slide, I have a few other things. This is not all that we do, because we do broader youth engagement as well. The Maine League of Women Voters is actually part of Democracy Maine, which includes a couple of other organizations. That's how we have more staff than you normally would for a state our size. But that includes a partnership with Maine Students Vote, which is we reach out to college students. We have a volunteer-led statewide youth engagement project that partners with other organizations, and we're doing curriculum needs assessment. So there is a model where we're attempting to connect in a variety of different ways, and that all of these things either feed into the youth council or sort of collaborate alongside it. I want to say, I think the biggest reason I'm here tonight and that I'm excited about this is I advise these young folks, just this is my job, and once they started getting more engaged, we needed somebody to be their advisor. It's me. I've loved working with them. It's wonderfully fun. They are passionate and driven. They take up issues we're not, like the league wasn't planning on taking up. They went from doing a voter registration and get out the vote stuff to picking up half of our advocacy agenda, learning how to track bills, teaching each other how to talk to legislators and submitting testimony. And they enjoyed every step in that process, right? Because each step was learning to do something new, learning to be effective, seeing how their voices could be heard. And I want to say, we guaranteed them a spot on our board. And one of them that I think would be their choice can't be the spot on our board because she, like Layla, is 14. So she needs to be a voting member of the league to be on our board. She would need to be 16. They'll choose someone else, and that's not the end of the world. But when I look at the young folks we're working with, I don't want you to think that Layla here is the only person like herself. I work with several people a whole lot like her who show up interested in democracy, who, when I say, what brings you to this work, expecting them to talk about issues, they say, I just really think democracy works better if more people are engaged in it, if we can make sure that there isn't too much money in it. Like, they actually say those things that are so central to what the league wants to do. So thank you for inviting me here to kind of share this piece. And I just want to encourage everybody. I love this push to recognize the contributions and potential contributions of folks who are younger. Yeah, and I'm happy to, if anybody wants to get in touch later about Maine stuff, I'm very happy to do that.
Thank you, Evan. We appreciate you and all of our speakers this evening. It's important that we are informed if we're going to have a proper discussion of the pros and cons of moving this action recommendation forward. We want to go in with our eyes wide open. I think Miriam's wisdom from what happened in 2016 will educate us and guide us. And I'm sure you're asking yourselves right now, how do we get to that future state of having the bylaws at national change to be more inclusive from where we are today? And we want to open it up now to Miriam to talk a little bit about some next steps that she thinks are critical for us here in Wisconsin to succeed in our endeavor to change the age bias.
Thank you, Ellen. So if you are going to go forward, I think it is critical that you contact other state leagues, start with the state leagues, and ask for their support for this amendment. Or see if they have any, or find out if they have objections to the amendment. So it'll tell you a lot about how much support is out there. And you already have a good connection with Evan. So Maine, I'm assuming, is on board here. At the time in 2016, California was definitely on board. It was with us, it was one of our major partners, so that they helped us get support of local leagues in California, because it's just literally a logistics thing. How do you find, you've got to find the right person to contact them. You've got to make a phone call, make a follow-up phone call, get to the right people, follow up to that because they're going to have had a discussion with their league, something, it's just it's a lot of footwork. Then also you want to notify the National League. There will be you could start with your National League liaison and or whoever is the bylaws committee chair. Sometimes that person is not yet appointed. So they might not be appointed till late this year, because literally they don't need one until January to February or so, before the national convention. But it's wise to contact national and tell them this is what we are doing. Also, you could get really, really lucky and find out that somebody else already has this in their minds, and they're going to propose it, and then you get to help them instead of you doing all the work. That could happen. And I don't know where the US board is on this at the moment. You would want to inform them and get them. You would want to get all of your local leagues informed and on board as soon as you can. So you want people to officially sign on as, I'll call it a sponsor to the bylaws amendment. So your local leagues, other state leagues who can tell you local leagues to contact, and national. And if you can do all that, you're in business. You would also want to have a caucus at convention, I'm going to assume the next convention is in person. You would want, you know how that works. You just set up a caucus room and just make sure it's the night before. It's hard to know right exactly when. Bylaws tend to be early in a convention. I'm not sure when exactly they would be. They could be as early as the first plenary. So it's hard to know. But you'd want to have a caucus set up and ready to go early, and you'd want to lobby delegates. So one way to do that is to have a little handout ready to go. We made little a third of a page handouts and said, please vote for our amendment. And here's what it is. And here's who we are. And here's why it's a good idea. So that's the most you can do. And then make sure you have speeches lined up and ready to go. And there you go. That's
Miriam, thank you so much for your guidance. I am sure that those of us attending tonight have questions of their own for our panel. We are a relatively small group, so if Ellen can stop her screen share, I think we'll be able to see everyone, and you can ask your own question versus having to ask questions through the chat. Although if you want to type a question in, I'll make sure it gets to our panels. Does anyone have a question?
I do. Deborah, it's Barb.
Hi, Barbara.
I'm still in, I kind of just came from working out, so I'm not putting my video on. I have a question. I want to know the type of arguments that people have heard against the changing the bylaw. Why are they, what are they saying? No, we have to have this minimum of 16.
Miriam, do you want to address that?
So the argument, actually, the worst of the arguments were that people, I'm almost embarrassed to say this because it was so absurd, right? There was a reduction, arguments were made to just reduce to the absurd, that people would bring their children, like, and as in their little kids, they would drag them along to a league meeting, make them members, and then have them vote. In other words, tell them how to vote and take over a league. Literally, that was an argument against, made against having no age, we're just removing the age requirement. There was very little, it just seemed to devolve to that really fast. That's what really sticks out in my mind. I admit this is 5 years ago, and it was the depressing part of this that stuck out with me, because where I'm sitting there with students from the Bloomington League who were 16. It was just, I could have crawled underneath one of those floor tiles. It was so awful. And there didn't seem to be any argument, no compelling argument seemed to be made. We've got 14-year-olds who are engaged and involved, or 13-year-olds. I mean, to me, you can argue all over the place about the age and what's the youngest age. I don't know. It's just going to sort itself out in various situations. How young does a person need to be? I don't know. But the diversity argument was made that, we need to include young people, that they ought to be voting members. I mean, to be fair, okay, everybody remember, they can be members, right? Anybody can be a member. They just can't be a voting member. And we had this very much closely tied to the citizenship issue, right? Because we were just coming from citizens at least 18 years of age to try to change that to persons, blah, 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 can be voting members. And I don't, so maybe my best insight to you is that the league can be weirdly conservative. You know what I mean? They don't want to change. They don't want to change something. It like scares them. That's about it.
Okay.
Beyond that.
Thank you, Miriam. It looks like Joan has a question.
Yeah, I get excited because I do think the young folks have a voice and it's there. I'm more curious, I guess, on some of the practical things, like we have a student now, which is, you know, they're free memberships and they have to be in a school. What is the rule? I don't want to say rules, but what are you looking at? When do they still have to be in school for all of that? Are you looking at having no age, and then at what point do they become full member? You know, I'm trying to understand the different definitions of your membership then when you have no ages.
I'll let
I'd be
Ellen.
happy to take that. Yeah. Okay, so membership fee waivers for students is an entirely different issue that's in place currently. National, the state league here, and some local leagues have also done it. Some have just totally like really dropped costs, but that's apart from making any like not incorporating any restriction on age to become a voting member. It's unrelated to how one acquires a membership, if it's through paid dues, through reduced fee options for those dues, being an additional member to a primary member, in which case your dues are slighter, or being a student connected to a curriculum, which, by the way, I think that's kind of bias in itself. If you want to be inclusive to youth, you shouldn't be, you know, have an education bias and have it only linked to enrollment. So these are very true. One's apples, one is oranges in terms of what constitutes a voting member would be anyone who joins of any age, if this were to pass, and they are then allowed to vote. Then what the bylaws call associate members can become any kind of weird scenario that goes on. We have one in my local league who just doesn't care to send any payment to National for some reason. And so, you know, she donates to our league. We don't actually have a fee for that, but she's just categorized as an associate member. You might put volunteers in that space as well, or donors who simply donate, but they don't really want to join your organization. They're glad you're in the world. They don't necessarily participate. So does that help at all, Joan?
Oh, you're on mute.
You're mute.
Not really, because again, I'm trying to figure out from you know, as a treasurer, what am I looking at with memberships and all the different kinds, and how we classify them, and when do they become, do we as a league decide when or who pays and becomes voting?
So, okay,
So voting isn't connected to the amount you pay. I mean, some people come into the league and membership through a waiver. Others, you know, pay dues. So however you come into membership pay-wise is the fact that when you become a member, you
Yes.
would become a voting member with
Okay.
that age restriction removed.
So let me chime in here from a parliamentary, because I can't help myself. But in any organization, the definition of a member is generally going to be someone who pays the dues, right? And then you may have different categories as to or restrictions on those members, like we used to have. So we used to have a person who was not a citizen and who was not yet 18 years of age. They could pay all the dues they wanted, but they were not voting members, right? So then that was changed to persons at least 16. If you pay the dues, you are a voting member. Now, so actually the associate category would be anybody who is not a person at least 16 years of age. So that removed a very small segment. It removed only an associate member. By this definition is only somebody who's not at least 16 years of age, who joins the league and pays their dues. Now, so I understand Joan's question too, because the league added a part. Those who are students are defined as individuals enrolled either as full-time or part-time. That's part 4 of section 2, types of membership. And the reason for that was they reduced the dues that National was expecting, the PMP, right? They reduced the PMP. So it's a nightmare for treasurers.
Yeah.
I am right there with you.
Just to further let's just to pull those apart a tiny bit more. We now in Maine have pay-as-you-can memberships, including free memberships to anyone who needs them. We just implemented this over the last year. It hasn't hurt us any. People who can afford to pay are still paying. We get more participation from people who couldn't, which means that your vote in the league is not tied to, you don't buy it. It is not tied to whether you contribute financially. It's tied to your desire to help run the organization. And so separating those two concepts is, I think, helpful because usually they are connected, and your ability to contribute financially is like one of the ways you show commitment to the organization. It's just not everyone can do that. So by pulling them apart, we kind of get to say, okay, the 13-year-old, we don't want to say the 13-year-old can't contribute financially because they very well possibly can. But even if they can't, they can choose to want to help guide the organization, which is the other piece. So yeah.
And thank you, Evan. I think that sets the stage for conversations that we should be ready for at National Convention. This is going to come up. And we are not the only league, and Maine is not the only league that has created membership options through a DEI lens to ensure that we're as inclusive as we can be, and that we engage as many folks in making the impact that we make as an organization as possible. And so those are the kind of questions, or I assume anyway, those will be the questions we're going to need to have good answers to. And I think some of the good answers are going to come from, individuals like Layla and folks who participate in the Maine Youth Council to share their experience of how they're contributing. And it's not a dollar sign. It's a commitment to democracy, and we need to lift that up. And I'm hopeful that this is just another in many conversations that we've been having over the last couple of years about the transformation of this organization from what we have historically been to what we vision for ourselves. And another milestone. We just got to keep making the milestones. So, are there other questions? All right. I want to thank you all for your participation. We are willing at the state staff level to answer additional questions if you want to send them to us. Ellen or I can be available to do that. We do have the CAC committee. We now have a board committee, a DEI board committee, and we are all deeply committed to ensuring that we do become the vision and we don't stay in the current status quo. And we'll take all of you, as Miriam indicated, to support this effort and advocate for it when we get further down the road at National Convention, to gain partners with other state leaders and ensure that we come into the 2022 convention as prepared and as driven as the passion that we heard from Layla and the passion that Evan sees from his youth council on a day in and day out basis. This is the start of something very important for this organization, and I thank you all for taking your time this evening to participate.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Thank you.
I'd like to add before we close that we have recorded a session and we'll send that out to league leaders and post it on our website. And I'd encourage you to encourage your fellow league members to spend a little time with the recording so that they can be well prepared for the vote that will happen in the plenary session on June 12th and starting late morning, 11 o'clock, 11:15 rather, and it's going to run through the lunch hour. So thank you for attending.
And it looks like
and all the panelists.
Evan dropped a link to a video that when we send out the link to this video, we'll send out the link to that video too. So thank you.
Just the one I referenced in my talk. And if you like doing data-driven work, it's a great example of they do youth civic engagement graphs. So
Thank you, Evan. Wonderful. Okay,
Thank you
well,
all.
Thank
have
you
a
all.
wonderful
Have a good
evening, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.